without further ado, I will introduce somebody who needs no introduction at the Green Gathering, has spoken here many, many times, but this time, Hugh Warwick, a.k.a. Hedgehog Hugh, at Hedgehog Hugh, is speaking on Cull of the Wild, Killing in the Name of Conservation, exploring the most complex ethical challenges faced by conservationists around the world. And I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for letting me step in at short notice. First of all, a quick hands up. Who thinks we should kill hedgehogs? Okay, we will get on to killing hedgehogs in a minute. When I first suggested writing this book about killing for conservation, Zoe here just said, but you write about nice things, about hedgehogs and beavers and water voles and bats, and people like those. Then I went to a conference and was saying to sort of colleagues of mine, I've got commissioned to write this book. And they kept going, you're brave. And I'd like, I don't want to be brave. I don't want to be, this is just really fascinating. And so anyway, I ended up with this, I spent a couple of years or more now researching into the subject of killing for conservation. And it's, well, why the hell are you doing that when you talk about hedgehogs? And I have to explain that I began my work on hedgehogs right at the beginning, doing this very subject. And so I'm going to a quick sort of recap and explanation about why this book started. And I should also say this book has been, all the way through it, an absolute collision between my heart and my head. And one of the things which I was really keen on doing, because I've spoken to a bunch of people who I instinctively find challenging company. But even so, however difficult I found them, I was very open with my own set of prejudices. In fact, the very first word of the first draft of this book was prejudice, and I laid out my prejudice. Because I'll give you my prejudices now, just because I think it's nice for everyone to accept that they have their own baggage which they bring with them. They think they're coming to an argument entirely objectively, but actually there's a whole bunch of other stuff too. So, I love animals. I particularly love hedgehogs. I have a tattoo. I have pretty much every item of clothing which is doable in hedgehogs. I mean, in patterns, I should say, not actually out of hedgehogs, because that's uncomfortable. And there's a very small market in roadkill hedgehogs being recycled as a... anyway, that's by the by. I love hedgehogs. I find the imagery, the idea that people take pleasure from killing animals grotesque. I find it actually makes me ill. I find myself, when I'm trying to enter into conversation with people who have a relationship with nature which involves a lot of killing, difficult. I mean, I feel like I'm going to shout or I'm going to cry because I can't quite control that anger and that rage. My head and my heart, however, have reached moments of enormous disagreement. Anyway, the point of this idea about recognizing your prejudice is because we all have them, and we have them reinforced because we are in our own little bubbles, and we're in this fantastic bubble now. But this bubble is specifically a bubble. I've been to other bubbles, I've looked in them, and it's very, very different. And everybody in those bubbles knows they're right, in the same way that we know we're right. I know I'm right. I've talked to philosophers about this because people have been thinking about thinking, obviously, for years. And one of them was saying, well, you don't have prejudice. What you've got is moral intuition. And you've got principles. And I was going, oh, this is great. So what I've got is principles, but what they've got is prejudice. Anyway, point is, we all come to all of the complicated issues we face with a whole bunch of baggage. And if we don't recognize that, then we can't have honest and open conversations about things. And also we can't have debates and arguments about things constructively. There's a quote from Joseph Joubert from the late 19th century, and he said, the point of argument and debate is not winning, but progress. And actually, this is the point. You can fight and fight and fight because you know that all the swans are white, until, of course, some sod goes to Australia and comes back and says, oh, actually, the black swans too. Stuff changes, things change. So having that degree of honesty was right at the heart of this, which is why it's been such a very uncomfortable journey in many places. So why did I do this? Because it began with, for me, hedgehogs. Oh, it'll work. I have to make it work. Get closer. Okay, you fucker. Oh, yeah, got it. Right, sorry, pardon me. Oh, you're filming, sorry. You can edit that bit out. Okay, so... This is that little dot right up there, North Ronaldsay, the most northerly of the Orkney archipelago. And when I was 19, I did my third-year project for my degree up on that island. Spent my summer holidays up there counting hedgehogs. And I have had many people say, well, why did you go up there to count hedgehogs? And I have to point out it was the only way to find out how many there were. And some people just really ask stupid questions. And the reason I was up there counting hedgehogs was because they'd been introduced in 1974 by the postman, Mr. John Tulloch. And he'd introduced hedgehogs onto North Ronaldsay. All of the Orkneys were free of hedgehogs before we turned up with our boats and moving things around. He'd introduced hedgehogs because he'd heard that a really good way of controlling garden pests is hedgehogs. There's a news story said, because I interviewed him about it, a news story had said, if you haven't got any hedgehogs in your garden, find somewhere with lots of hedgehogs and bring them to your garden, release them. So he did. He went to visit his aunt in Aberdeen and came back with the 2 hedgehogs, so either a male and a female, or there's a pregnant female, and then they sort of were drifted out of thought and time, and nobody really paid attention to the hedgehogs, until their numbers started to be seen more and more often, and at the same time, the breeding success of the ground nesting birds. Now, North Ronaldsay is... There we go. North Ronaldsay is, like most of Orkney, quite flat. North Ronaldsay doesn't have much in the way of trees. The birds all nest on the ground. Has anyone been up to Orkney? You know that it's generally a fairly sort of windswept type of existence. Yeah, the birds all nest on the ground. The hedgehogs are scent feeders. They'll snuffle around at night. They'll find nests. They will eat birds' eggs. In particular, the concern was about the Arctic terns. Vicious little fuckers, but beautiful, beautiful birds. They're called Pecky Turno up there. And if you are foolish enough to work with ornithologists and go through the Arctic tern colonies during the day while you're looking to ring the chicks, you will have these birds fluttering above your head and then dive bombing you, attempting to impale their very sharp beak into your scalp. And you frequently come away with that, with blood dripping down your face, so always work with somebody much taller than yourself. So anyway, the concern was the Arctic tern numbers were going down as the hedgehog numbers were going up, and that the hedgehogs were the blame to this. So I went up there to look at this problem in 1986. And then I went back up again in 1991 to repeat this work, to have a look and see whether things had changed. The Bird Observatory up there had organised an airlift and taken a few hundred hedgehogs off the island. And as I went back in 91, it was like, oh, it's much more complicated than just hedgehogs. The amount of food the Arctic terns were getting was really, really massively reduced compared to other colonies around the country. And in fact, this involved me sitting beside an Arctic tern colony for hours and hours and hours, counting the sand eels which they were bringing into their chicks, and they bring them held in their beaks. And they were shorter sand eels, and there were fewer of them. Basically, they were running out of food. This was probably to do, even back then, to do with shifts in temperature of the water, which was meaning that the krill, the various small beasties in the water were moving further away to cooler water, which meant that the sand eels moved further away, which then meant that the Arctic terns had further to travel. So it was complicated. Anyway, that was all going on. Interesting story. Then you may remember a story in the press. Next slide, please. Okay. The Outer Hebrides. And this was back in 2003. The RSPB, with Nature Scotland as they are now, and the Scottish Government, decided that it was going to be the best way to control the problem of hedgehogs on the South Uist, North Uist and Benbecula was to kill the hedgehogs. They were going to organise a hedgehog cull. Now, I had fed all of my information into the ecologists because that's what I do. But then it was complicated. My life became very complicated. We got a baby. We got married. Other way around. We got married. We had a baby. And so I hadn't really been paying attention to what was going on. And then when the news came that the cull had been announced, they were going to kill hedgehogs up there to protect all the ground nesting birds. Same problem, hedgehogs introduced in the 1970s. I assumed some science had been done which proved you couldn't relocate the hedgehogs. So I went up to the Uists to do a piece for Radio 4, and it was fascinating. Everybody was there, all the papers, all the TV crews were there, and I then discovered that, one, the people who were opposing the cull were being painted as dangerous animal rights activists, and the people who were doing the cull had to have their identities hidden because of the dangerous animal rights activists. But I knew the dangerous animal rights activists, and they were my mates, and they were bunny huggers like me, and they were up there trying to save the hedgehogs, stopping the hedgehogs being killed. They were charging around the island at night, rescuing hedgehogs and shipping them off the island so they wouldn't get killed. So it became a bit of a battle of words. There was a lot in the press about this. Then I discovered that the people killing the hedgehogs were using some of my data about hedgehog survival to justify killing, and I became grumpy. In fact, they were arguing that they couldn't shift the hedgehogs alive because they would suffer a slow and lingering death. And in part, justification for that was some research I did, radio tracking hedgehogs in Devon, where 5 of my 12 hedgehogs had died. But not one of them suffered a slow and lingering death. It was all fast and violent. And they were run over by cars and eaten by badgers. So there is Anyway, I got grumpy, joined the campaign, and eventually, 3 years later, did research which proved you could move the hedgehogs fine, and they stopped the cull. So it took 4 years of killing the hedgehogs, but eventually I did the research which stopped the cull. That was exciting. And so then I went to a hedgehog conference, because there are such things as hedgehog conferences. The European Hedgehog Research Group. In fact, there is one in Berlin in January, which I'm going to go and speak at. And I was at a hedgehog conference, and I love how niche my life can be. And I was there was a conservationist there from New Zealand. There we go. There we go. Research. There we go. There was a conservationist there from New Zealand, and he was busy telling us all how he was killing hedgehogs in New Zealand. And I was like, oh, you don't need to do that because I've shown you can do this without killing hedgehogs. And so we had a little chat about it. Then he basically pointed out that I was a blithering idiot, or words to that expect. And so I ended up writing an article which said, I can't see a reason not to kill the hedgehogs in New Zealand. Now, let me explain. Hedgehogs were introduced to New Zealand in the 1860s. The colonists who arrived looked around New Zealand. They said, this place is really gorgeous, but you know what it's missing? And so this isn't a joke. They actually wrote back to England and said, please send hedgehogs. And now there's a whole bunch of other stuff sent as well. Lots and lots of trouble has been caused by this rather erroneous idea. Oh my God, that's very strange out there. Sorry, very, very tall bicycles. Sorry, it was a distraction. So it was a fascinating situation. The hedgehogs have been introduced to the islands for a long time. They were thought to be the most benign of the introductions. Obviously, the really big threats there are things like the rodents, stoats in particular, and possums and any other mustelids. So it was a really interesting situation to find myself in, because hedgehogs have now been shown to be having a really detrimental impact on the native wildlife of New Zealand. So what do? You can't just catch all the hedgehogs and keep them in some sort of hedgehog sanctuary till they die of old age. That is not a good idea. There are no contraceptions that work. There are many obstacles to that, as I'm sure you can be aware. And the idea of, probably 2 or 3 times a year, I have quite serious conversations. I have people being quite seriously asking me the question, I should say, why can't we just ship the hedgehogs back to the UK? And then, this then begins another very long conversation about what is the point of trying to remove the hedgehogs from New Zealand. It's trying to stop the problem, which is actually to do with eradication rather than just harvesting them. But there's another story we'll get onto in a minute. So I can't see a reason not to kill the hedgehogs there, because the alternatives don't exist. However, it is like the entire progress of this book has not been simple. These things are not a simple case of a binary kill or don't kill. There are many, many layers to it. And part of the problem in New Zealand is, they've launched, because it's not just hedgehogs, they've got an entire campaign, Predator-Free New Zealand. They've described it as their moonshot, to remove all of these invasive non-native species, is what the technical term for them is. The possums, rats, stoats, ferrets, weasels, feral cats. They're trying to get rid of all of those by 2050. All of them. And this isn't just a case of controlling those species, it's eradicating them, getting rid of them completely. And this has led to quite a dramatic change in people's relationship with the natural world, because it's now one where some species have been given a name of the enemy. And this enemy is being associated as a threat to the nation. And so it's becoming very jingoistic. It's becoming a bit of a flag-waving thing. Schools are set up now, trying to do their best. Which school can do best? How many stoats can you kill in your backyard? It's become quite unpleasant. The language has changed. The relationship has changed. And I spoke to a conservationist from New Zealand who's now working in America. And he pointed out one of the big issues we've got is that we are seduced by various images of New Zealand. And there are places in New Zealand which are stunning. I've never been to New Zealand. I don't want to go to New Zealand. It looks too pretty. I feel I might stay if I went to New Zealand. And they've got hedgehogs, so what's not to love? But there are places like Zealandia, which is this 500-year vision of a project, an enormous site from which they have removed all of the invasive non-native species, all of the things that us lot took to New Zealand. And talking to people who live in New Zealand, talking to conservationists over there, they've talked about, we heard about Silent Spring with Rachel Carson. They have silent years now because the birds have gone, because the insects have stopped chirping, and that's in part down to the predation of the invasive species. So the landscape, the entire ecosystems are being transformed. So they're trying to turn it back. But what my mate Wayne pointed out was our images of New Zealand are very coloured. And I know that New Zealand is perfect because I've watched Lord of the Rings probably more times than is reasonable. And yes, there are bits of it that are like that. But since the very first humans arrived, and I mean the very first humans arrived there, we have done nothing but fuck it up. We have killed, we have exterminated, we have caused extinctions. The big moa, the beautiful and grazing birds were all wiped out by the very first humans that were there. However, the people who became the Maori were really, really shit at extinctions. They didn't have a clue how to do it until we turned up. Then we showed how you can do this really well. And we've done fantastically, creating one of the most degraded environments out there. We've watched Lord of the Rings too many times. We don't know quite what New Zealand is like. And it is it's been after the first colonists arrived, and they were taking off the seals and they were hunting the whales. Then there was the move to remove some specific trees, which are very good for boat building, but they did that by just chopping everything around them, destroying that. Then they moved on to the minerals, and then they moved on to extractivist farming techniques like this. And so New Zealand is already very vulnerable. The reason why the invasive non-native species, the visitors, the ones that we took to the islands, have done so well is because we created a very degraded space in which the native wildlife found it very hard to defend itself against this onslaught. It's much easier to attack the new species than it is to address the root problem, which is a massively degraded environment. So therefore, actually I've got some cards. My publishers were very kind. They made me some little cards. Should we play God, or should nature be left to take its course? I don't have any books to sell because I didn't know I was going to do this talk until yesterday, or the day before. But please take a card if you are interested, and then, I don't know, go to your library and take it there. And it's this question of, like, should we be playing God? Should we intervene? Okay, hands up. Who thinks we should play God? Okay. Yeah. So the question, who said, we think we already are. That's the problem, is we can say, let nature take its course. Who thinks we should let nature take its course? Okay. Because we have already done the intervening. We've already done the thing which has caused the problem. The question is, do we just hold our hands up and go, okay, let's nature take its course, and then leave it be and let it run? Now, I've had interesting conversations with animal rights activists, friends of mine, who are very, very, you must never, never do this. And pointing out, it's like, yes, timescales are one of the issue. Maybe we're thinking on too short a timescale. Maybe we should be considering this over hundreds of years. In hundreds of years, the rats on New Zealand will become New Zealand rats, and there'll be conservationists, if we're still around, who are trying to defend those rats because they're rare rats. They are specific to New Zealand. We should be defending them against marauding, I don't know, carnivorous hippopotamuses or whatever else has turned up. Sorry, that was a reference to cocaine hippos, but ask me about that later, maybe. And it's like a drug mule, but different. And do we actually step in and do this? Are we working on the wrong sort of time frame? Then I realized one of the things, do we leap in and stop, try and save the artwork from a gallery on fire because we're going to make more art? Do we intervene and stop species being driven to extinction? Because more species will come in the end. It's fine. We're not very humble in the face of nature. We forget that we're trying to win this war against. We're not. We're never going to win a war against nature. There may be the odd battle that we might win. In the end, we're gone. Nature will continue. That's fine. But what's going to be happening in intervening? Should we be intervening? Should we be diving in? It's one of the questions I was trying to answer. I also realised has anyone got a clock? Is that time? 25 past. Oh, shit. Okay, I'm going to skip on a little bit. Lundy was gorgeous, small little island, lots of rats, lots of not many birds. And then they killed all the rats. Lundy's amazing. And I was initially a bit sort of sceptical about this. Well, so you've decided that a bunch of bloody puffins are more important than black rats and brown rats. And it's possibly the last breeding population of black rats in the United Kingdom. And the RSPB said, yes, we think that puffins and Manx shearwaters are more important. But this is an active choice that somebody has made. All of these sorts of conservation threats and problems, somebody's making an active choice. And I suppose one of the overarching messages from the book is that it's got to be an active choice. It's got to be something which you have made a conscious decision to do. You have to do that because you need to be responsible. You need to own what you're doing. You need to own the suffering which you're going to cause by spreading poisons all over the island and the suffering that those rodents are going to face. Yes, you may decide it's important to remove the rodents from the island, but you can't do that and then just say, yeah, but it doesn't matter how it's done. It doesn't matter if they all suffer. Anticoagulant poisoning is shit. It's a really, really nasty way to die. It's just we tend not to see it. For a long time, moles were the only animal you could kill with strychnine. And that was because moles would die underground. And you wouldn't see them as they contorted so much, their spines snapped. So we kill rodents with anticoagulants because on the whole, as they are suffering internal hemorrhaging, they just go away and eventually die. Inconveniently in my wall cavity sometimes. But it's something which we have to acknowledge. We are causing great cruelty. Lundy's definitely worth a visit. Squirrels, the cover of my book. Thankfully, Zoe here is actually reading a proof of my book because, as I say, didn't bring one. But it's a squirrel cover. And I love squirrels. Grey squirrels, red squirrels, flying squirrels, any sorts of squirrels. Squirrels are fantastic. But we know in this country, if you want to have red squirrels, you can't have grey squirrels. And it used to be thought as a competition thing. When I was doing my degree, it was all down to competition for resources. But grey squirrels carry a squirrel pox virus, which kills red squirrels horribly and doesn't affect grey squirrels. So we have this situation. Do we want to have red squirrels? If so, we have to kill grey squirrels. So who here thinks we should kill grey squirrels? Yeah, go for it. Okay, so it is, yeah. And I have had some of my great wildlife moments in the company of grey squirrels. You go into St James's Park in London, you feed them nuts, whilst the also invasive non-native species of the ringneck parakeets flutter around, being terribly camp and gorgeous. And they are some of the great wildlife moments you're going to get because you're close to nature. Very rarely do you get close to a mammal, apart from hedgehogs. This is why hedgehogs are the best. And so we have a situation. Do we want to have red squirrels, though? And if so, what do we do? So Anglesey is a place where they now have red squirrels flourishing. And that's because Craig Shuttleworth, who I went and met, has killed over 7,000 grey squirrels by hand. And why does he do it by hand, you say? Well, because if he scattered poison around the place, a load of other animals might be killed by it. You get poisons moving into the environment. You end up with anticoagulants being picked up by the buzzards that are flying over and picking up the carcasses of the, etc. You end up creating a problem. He had live traps smothering the island, and he went round every single day checking the traps. And if there was a grey squirrel in the trap was open, the squirrel ran into a Hessian sack, and then he clubbed it to death with a priest. I was doing a radio programme. I was on Start the Week, which is very exciting. And I just mentioned that in passing, and the interviewer had no idea that a priest was a form of truncheon, and this took the conversation into a very, very strange situation. And it's like, you thought they were doing the choir boys was bad, but just you wait till they've done to squirrels. Anyway, where was it? So anyway, point is, Craig killed, and he was very reluctant to meet her initially because he'd done a piece for the BBC a while beforehand. And then he got he got his name and address published by an animal rights group who was so opposed to what he was doing. They identified the names of his children. They knew where their children went to school. His family split up. He doesn't live with his children anymore. And he has done this because he wants red squirrels. I was asking him a series of questions, and we were walking through the woodland going to see the squirrels. And he said, are you trying to find out whether I was a psychopath before I started or whether it's turned me into a psychopath? And well, sort of, yeah. I said, well, he hasn't enjoyed killing anything. He doesn't enjoy killing anything at all. His actual main work now is trying to bring pine martens back into the area, and he's busily breeding, importing pine martens and making sure their habitat's fine. He hates the idea of killing grey squirrels. However much he loves the red squirrels, he hates killing grey squirrels because he is not somebody who wants to do this, but it's the only way you'll get the red squirrels. So I said, well, this is fantastic. Now we've got red squirrels all over Anglesey, and it is well worth a visit. Come on, you little bastard. How many could you just... Thank you. Even me with a relatively small lens on my camera, you creep up and you go and see red squirrels. They're everywhere. It's wonderful. So I said, well, what are you going to do now? You're going to start killing the grey squirrels on mainland Wales and start spreading that out and trying to, make more space for red squirrels. And he looked at me like I was a nutter. I was like, well, of course not. Because all you're doing then is controlling squirrels. There's absolutely no point in controlling, he said, people talk about controlling wildlife. They're not, they're talking about harvesting wildlife. And it's about, you'll just do that forever if you want to do this. He was on an island, and they have had an incursion this year. They've killed 14 grey squirrels this year, but that's the first time in over 10 years they've had them on the island. And so there are people who want to kill grey squirrels. And this is a headline in The Guardian, which I thought was, kill them, kill them, kill them. And this is about harvesting grey squirrels. This is what King Charles is excited about, because he's very happy to have grey squirrels controlled ad nauseam. This, I feel, is wrong, is deeply wrong, because it just never ends. And these things have got to have a control. You've got to have an idea of what you're trying to achieve. And that's a question which, again, rises itself throughout the book, is what are we actually trying to achieve? What line are we trying to go back to? Are we trying to go back to the point where the ice retreated and we have a Mesolithic Britain with a few hunter-gatherers coming in? Well, we're obviously not going back to that. Are we going to go back to the Romans or the Normans? We can blame the Normans for most things, I suppose. But we're probably not going to aim to go back to that because, what about all our deer species? What about brown hares? One of our culturally iconic species. They're another bloody alien, aren't they? So we've got a whole bunch of the species which we know are deeply ours, but technically they're not. So where are we going to draw the line? And actually, as climate's changing, as the weather warms, there are new species moving into the country now. So we can't dip the place in aspic. So we have to work out ways of trying to make decisions which are, I would hope to suggest, consistent and not just stupid. You see, mink are gorgeous. Mink are so, so beautiful. I wrote this book with a mink coat hanging next to me. It may seem like a strange thing to do, but when my mother had died and I was clearing out the house, I found that her mink coat was still in the wardrobe. And it's like, well, what am I going to do with that? And as soon as I stroked it, I had a complete sort of Proustian moment of just going, wow, I remember her leaning over to kiss me goodnight when she was going out for dinner with my dad. I could smell her perfume. It was just, and so I had this mink coat hanging there, still in the house. And mink are amazing. Mink farming, fur farming is obscene, obviously. But it was a thing. And a bunch of farmers, realizing that the mink industry was going over, released mink into the wild. Some animal rights activists released some mink, but that was small amounts. But they bred, and they've done really, really well. Water voles are gorgeous too. One of our icons. Well, what? 2 minutes? Oh, shit. Anyway, the only way to have water voles thriving in the wild is not to have mink. That's the thing. So what do? Do we kill mink? Well, some people are trying to do that, but do you kill mink just forever? Do you control mink, or do you try and eradicate mink? I met a guy who's trying to eradicate mink, Tony Martin. And he thinks he can do it, partly because it turns out that they are uniquely susceptible to this sort of control in that they suffer from a condition called the Elie effect. Most species suffer from overcrowding. When you have too many of them, their breeding is suppressed. But with the mink, when their numbers decline, their breeding is diminished because they're simply not meeting each other. So there is a chance we could remove them humanely from this. He's already done South Georgia in the South Atlantic, removing millions of rodents. Killings, I should say. You see, killing millions of rodents from there. I went up to Orkney because Orkney is gorgeous. I like to go back to Orkney. And I thought for a brief moment I'll photograph things which might be on a Highland Park bottle. And I was up there because in 2011 they had their first sightings of stoats. And it also meant I got to meet Spud, who is, I think, possibly the most handsome Labrador I've ever met. And Spud is a stoat-sniffing dog, and Spud is quite remarkable. The work they're doing there now is to try and track down the last stoats. And his remarkable nose, I was across a small inlet, and he was walking into the wind there, So I missed the actual moment when he did it, but he then pulled, as he was walking into the wind, he pulled his handler back 20 metres until they found these two little bits of dried stoat scat in the tussocky grass. Anyway, it's just the idea of what his nose is experiencing in that environment is extraordinary. They have to stomp on stoats because stoats are stunningly effective breeders and colonizers. Female stoats, well, stoats are always pregnant. Because when a female stoat has given birth, a male will come into the nest and will mate with the female and will also mate with the kits. And they're too small to become pregnant, so they have delayed implantation. And so every female stoat out there is probably pregnant. So that means they can spread in numbers enormously quickly. And they are excellent, beautiful predators. So we're going to overrun this because there'll be 10 minutes of questions, not 15 minutes of questions. Sorry, I rambled too much at the beginning. I also wanted to talk to people involved in the game industry because I wanted to step outside of my relatively comfortable bubble of ecologists with whom I share a common language. And I found this very, very difficult. You'll be well aware of the sorts of threats that Chris Packham has faced. I've done events with him. This is at the Hen Harrier Day a couple of years ago. It was the one that rained. Those of you who've been to a Hen Harrier Day will know it always rains on Hen Harrier Day. In fact, we're thinking of moving Hen Harrier Days around the country to places suffering drought, because inevitably it will then rain. But I did some filming at his place in the New Forest, and they were just replacing his doors to his to the property, which had been burnt down in a very, very deliberate and well-trained manner. People knew what they were doing. The CCTV cameras showed it very clearly. There was an explosion. It wasn't just somebody dousing it with petrol. And they've threatened to kill him, Megan McCubbin, and his dogs. And they have to regularly have to have security guards at events like the Hen Harrier Day. And that is because there are people who are very opposed to his views on hunting. And I've had to try and break down my own personal prejudices and go and speak to some of them. And in the end, I couldn't do the worst, the ones who are right at the cutting edge. I spoke to the academic gamekeepers. Jonathan Reynolds is a fascinating guy, and we ended up having a fascinating discussion where our biggest point of contention was who had recorded the best version of Sibelius's Fifth Symphony. So we disagreed about the idea of killing animals for pleasure, but actually we were able to talk about most stuff we shared, apart from the Sibelius thing. He's still wrong about that. And then I met up with Mike Swan, and he took me around his estate he manages. We disagree very fundamentally. So he said he likes nothing better than to go on an armed nature ramble. He likes to shoot things and then eat them. It's his favourite thing. And he manages this entire estate. This estate was the biggest wildlife event I had of that year. I saw more wildlife on one afternoon's drive around that estate because of what he did. What he did, I think, is disgusting in terms of killing crows, killing foxes, killing whatever he can get his hands on. But we could have had a conversation which began with, I think you're disgusting. I think you're wrong. End of conversation. Or we could have a conversation which begins with, I love nature. You love nature. We have all of this in common. Let's try and work out where we have common ground. Because actually the point of argument is not going to be winning. It's about making progress. After I'd written about half the book, I bumped into another philosopher in Oxford, and I'd been talking about something else, and then he was asking me about that book, and he said, oh, it's fascinating, you're delving into Hegelian dialectics, how delightful. And I said, well, what? And so I had to write it down. I went home and Googled it. And it's the idea that you will begin with your thesis, your idea. And the old Platonic idea was that somebody have an antithesis, and then you'd argue back and forth. And what Hegel suggested was that rather than go back and forth, that you're presented with the antithesis of your idea, and then you create between you a synthesis, and then you argue that point, and you move on. It's basically applying a scientific discipline to thinking. And it's something which I'm trying very hard to do. And in close, one of the final bits which I found most important for me in the way that we think about this is how we have been created into polarities with our points of view. And it was Rory Stewart, the former Tory Secretary of State. He did a radio program about debate and argument. And in this, he said, on the whole, political discourse used to form a bell curve, normal distribution curve with most views roughly in the middle, and you have outliers on either side. And what social media and the move towards the current form of political discourse has done is to turn that into an empty wine glass. And the people in the middle tend to get shouted at by people on either side because they have become frightened on either side, and they need to defend their side. When I started writing this book, I could have followed my heart or my head and actually just gone with one side and said, I'm writing a book from this perspective. And I would have got actually far more attention, because I'd have not only got support from the people who supported me, but also got all of the anger and the shouty from the other people. And now what I've ended up with, and I have had this, the final point, was one moment about a month ago, I had an interaction on social media on Twitter with somebody, Trooper Snooks, he's a hunter, and he was basically, he'd read my book and he was a bit rude. And a little bit rude, not very rude, a little bit rude. And we had a chat offline. And in the end, he put out a tweet saying, I disagree with lots of what's in this book, but you should read it, to his hunting mates. The very next day, the chair of the Hunt Saboteurs Association said almost exactly the same thing. He's being a little bit rude about my book. So we took it offline, we had a chat, and they then put out a message saying, I disagree with a lot of what's in this book, but I think you should read it. And then I found that Animal Aid are actually selling it on their website. It's like, this is the for me, very small beginnings of trying to fill the wine glass, actually trying to get people to move away from those polarities. And obviously it's something which features in so much of life, is that polarized version of thinking. And so I think it's applicable across the board. Thank you very much for listening, and I really, really would love questions. Thank you.
So in my work, I do a lot of woodland surveys and woodland management for conservation and biodiversity. And the more I do surveys, the more I realise that grey squirrels and deer of various different species are causing our woodlands to slowly die, because there's no regeneration coming through. There are no different structures within the woodland. Some woodlands you go into, there's just nothing. It's like a desert. So we're using this data to try and justify our organisation allowing us to cull deer, but the amount of backlash that we've got from the public who use the woodlands and even people within my own organisation is massive. Do you have any recommendations for trying to overcome these challenges? Because killing stuff is horrible.
No, and utterly. And that's, I think one of the things you need to do very clearly right from the beginning is to be very honest. The RSPB for a long time used to get really shouted at by both sides. The gamekeepers would shout at the RSPB, say, we know you're killing, we know you're killing. And then animal rights activists would say, you're killing? How dare you? And so they eventually became very public with it. They published data, I think it was around 8,000 species killed in 4 years. And that's not including rats, mice, and rabbits. And so they're becoming open with it and actually having the conversation. No, you're absolutely right. And I've met this. It's like there's this very, very clear, we shouldn't do that because it's wrong. And in terms of how you do it, I mean, it's information. We know this with climate change. Obviously, information isn't the answer. It's about stories. It's about trying to explain it, to take people to the woods. Mike Swan took me to the woods that the fallow deer are ruining. I mean, they're lollipop trees, loads of lollipop trees, and there is nothing underneath them. So all of the potential for breeding birds, etc., is gone. The fallow deer also are an invasive non-native species as well. But that shouldn't be, I think, the issue. It's to do with whether the animal itself is causing any sort of problem. I really struggled with this because I think when I was younger, when I read Peter Singer's book Animal Liberation, it was very clear that it was simple and it was wrong to do stuff that was wrong. It was simple. And then later you become exposed to other things and things become murkier. And so my philosophical friends then introduced me to these two different schools of thought. You have deontological thinking. I used the word deontological without even hesitating now. But that idea that things are simply right or wrong. And you do it or you don't do it. Thou shalt not kill. Or you have utilitarian thinking where you end up working out whether or not the biggest benefit will come by doing a certain action. I think it has to be down to communication, but it has to be done with, I think we need people who are experts in sort of mediation skills in all forms of this. Because having an expert turn up and say, this is what must happen because this is the fact, isn't going to work. And so that moment of getting the chair of the Hunt Saboteurs Association and the hunter basically both saying the same things at me on social media made me feel that there is potential to actually make progress with this. That's not an answer to the question. It's more just, I feel your pain. Thank you. when I was first involved in the anti-roads movement, it was, a lot of this was sort of, you could easily wash off as NIMBYism. So I think there are times when there are really crucial issues along this. Wind turbines themselves do have an impact on certain migratory birds, and you need to take that into consideration with the siting of the wind turbines. And they have an impact on land. Ones have an impact on bats. I've met the dog who goes around sniffing around trying to find the dead bats beneath wind turbines. So they are not cost-free, but it's about telling the stories which compare the costs and the costs of not doing it. So the costs of not killing, and this is something which I was trying to explain to people who had a very sort of deontological point of view about this, was that the cost of not killing can actually mean more animals die. And it's just trying to get that reality, but in stories which they will appreciate. So it's finding the common ground first. What is the vision you want? What is it you're looking for? You want to have a pristine landscape. Well, it's not going to be, because it's going to fucking burn. So how about we try and okay, maybe don't go at it like that. But you find the common ground. You work from the common ground always, and then try and move on to the more contentious issues from there. Again, not. You need somebody cleverer than me. Sorry, that was something.
Hi, everybody. I've been involved with the badger cull for 12 years now.
Which side of it?
Yes, I always say that, and people look at me. Is he nice or is he not? Couple of things. Don't want to get in an argument about it, but I'd like to posit the question. You're talking about head and heart, and it's still in my heart that the badger cull is the wrong thing to do.
And in my head.
And in my head. But that's leading on to, I would say, there's nothing wrong in being led by your heart in these things. And actually, if you believe it's wrong to kill animals, then I would go for that first, definitely. But in the case of the badger cull, and it's still continuing, my friends, at the moment, and in our cull area, which is only North Avon, they killed 400 last year in a supplementary cull. But I'd like to say what is interesting is the fact how the science of it, I think the original science was flawed. I think the subsequent science has been twisted by the ideological, what do you call it? The people on that would be our other side, the landholders and the people who want to kill the cudge. And there hasn't been any research. So in so much that actually there's an ideological battle going on. Or has been. There
has been a lot of research. So Rosie Woodruff, for example, she was doing the randomized badger control trials back in 20 or more years ago.
Sure.
And she came out from that saying, it's bullshit. That's a summary of the précis, which is of the paper. And she still says words to that effect. And I mean, for example, for the badgers, for me, it's interesting, is that I know that if we go and wipe out all the badgers, we'll increase the number of hedgehogs.
Well, not quite.
Well,
I think you're twisting your argument.
No, sorry,
that's not very nice on hedgehogs.
But so what I'm saying is even though that is they've done the work, I've read the papers, they've done it. However, that's not an argument to go and kill badgers. There is, interestingly, I don't think there's any science out there which supports the badger cull. It's all ideology. There is nothing. I mean, the head and the heart are entirely at one with the badger cull. It's fucking nuts.
So, predators, natural predators for the deer, for the squirrels, and the political will to reintroduce where we can, see how that goes, and then save our woodlands. I'd like you to talk about that if you can. And we have very limited resources, and we've got between 60 and 100 species going extinct every day around the world. Do we really want to spend 100,000 or however many hundreds of thousands of pounds removing hedgehogs from one island when that many species are going extinct elsewhere?
Okay, the fifth most significant contributor to biodiversity and bioabundance loss around the world is invasive non-native species. The fifth. But I mean, it's interesting. It's the one which you can do stuff about. You can try and curb climate change. You can try and curb the rapacious destruction of habitat, etc., etc., etc. But what I mean, it's the low-hanging fruit on that side of it. In terms of reintroducing the predators that were there was a moment of excitement when some work was done in Northern Ireland showing that pine martens had a massive impact on grey squirrels. But that isn't quite as good as the data suggested. It's better if the pine martens are there. They will have an impact on grey squirrels, but they also kill red squirrels too. So it is complicated. It's down to that idea. We can do this, but by the time you've got societal backing to reintroduce wolves and lynx and whatever, and the time there's enough wolves and there's enough lynx to be actually having an impact on the deer, for example, we're talking hundreds of years, really, before they're up in numbers, they're spread around the country enough. And actually, the reality of wolves is, I mean, I would love it. I would love it. However, we fragmented this landscape so heavily that actually creating, I mean, you look at the Highlands of Scotland, you've got areas there where they could roam unhindered. But in most of the areas down south where we have got the problems with deer, and you imagine them running through, there isn't enough space without motorways and railway lines and canals to enable wolf populations to spread. So we simply have to reconnect the landscape as well. But that just takes too long. And we need, if we're serious about trying to interfere with some of these bigger problems, then we have to step up and tidy up the problem that we humans have created. So.
Question over there.
Hello, I came late to your talk, I'm very sorry, but I was at another one where somebody in the audience, it was about adapting to climate change. Somebody in the audience said, does anybody want some beavers? Because we've got too many in our area, and would you be interested in gorilla, taking the kind of gorilla project and putting them somewhere else? Thoughts?
Okay, well, I would, so principally, I know, it's alleged that people I am friends with might possibly have done things which possibly might look a bit like that. However, there is some political will, a social capital already building to have beavers back into the landscape because they're such an amazing. I wrote a book about beavers, available from all good bookshops. It's called Beavers, and sometimes this title, Cull of the Wild, subtle. No, beavers, not. No, I can really see the appeal of doing that, but when the door is already ajar. I think that by they've got them in Ealing, for goodness sake. Now they've actually started. They've released them in official projects there. I'm of the mind that when you've got political will on your side, if you then go, we're just going to do it, and you can end up losing the political will. And it's useful to have that societal and political will on your side because then it makes the thing more likely to happen. So yes, there is the just do it side of me, but there is also the bigger picture maybe. Interesting. But, sorry, and could you afterwards tell me who it is who's got too many beavers? That'd be nice. 2 minutes, okay. 2 more quick questions, 1 long question. Oh, so my wife wants to ask a question. Oh, shit.
It's just a quick question.
I did the washing up already.
It says somewhere where people could read your blog.
Oh, my blog? Oh. Good. I now have a Substack account. It's OnlyFans for writers. And if you ask me nicely, I'll send you my used pencils. Just search me on Substack. It's a non-Watsity one. It's free. But you can give me money if you want because I don't actually have a job. Thank you. No, good question. Sorry, yeah.
It was just to reiterate what the lady, it's a similar situation to what the lady had here. We're trying to rejuvenate woodland, trying to increase the biodiversity. And it is the grey squirrels and the deer, and to the point where we've had people picketing, we've had, and as soon as you mention deer, people go into Bambi mode. And anything that we can do about that, because, we've got an epidemic of deer in the country. Our problem with the grey squirrels isn't the red squirrel population. There's no red squirrels anywhere near us. It's that they're stripping the bark off anything off the saplings, off the trees, the same with the deer.
Just an interesting spin on that is that for many, many years, a lot of work was put in to killing red squirrels. By foresters because the same problem, the red squirrels having an impact. I had conversations with Animal Aid as the sort of charity who've been talking about this and being having very clear boundaries about it, and they're very deontological in their thinking about it. And we disagree on this, but they are still stocking the book on their website, which is, it shows that there must be some space for it. I found that with talking to some people is the outside, the front they give is often binary because that's how social media works. Because you have to have that because that generates outrage, which generates attention, and that's how social media works. But if you will have a conversation person to person about it, you will find that some people who seem implacable are actually far subtler than they might at first appear. Just one more, or so, is it tight? Okay.
You've criticised the culling of animals, and with that other question, the exchange of animals between places could be a no-no. So my question is, when you removed the hedgehogs, where did they go?
Oh, we took them to mainland Scotland.
So isn't that like another exchange of animals?
So I wasn't really criticising the exchange of animals. I mean, I think that having beavers in the environment is really great. What I'm saying is that if there isn't social and political will behind that, especially with the issue with beavers, because with the beaver issue, it's politically sensitive. It's been on a knife edge quite a long time. Now, I say the door is ajar. If we can just carry on gently pushing, and there are going to be beavers everywhere, that's fine. They're going to happen. I was just saying, if you just go and do it, there is a risk of damaging the political and social will behind it, and that could end up, getting the door shut. So interesting, they started killing beavers soon after they were released in Scotland. They had a beaver cull because the farmers on the Tay estuary said, "Oh, there's too many beavers," and that was because societal buy-in had failed. Now it's accepted and they're there. So, I'm very happy for moving things around if needs be. Thank you all, and thank you, Duncan.